You're about to leave tens of thousands of dollars on the table. And the worst part is, your real estate agent might not even tell you. Not because they're dishonest, but because most agents aren't builders. They don't know what a buyer's home inspector is going to flag. They don't know what a fresh coat of paint on the right surface actually does to an appraisal. And they definitely don't know the difference between a fix that costs $400 and one that costs $4,000. But I do. And if you're thinking about selling your house as is, or even just selling it soon without doing any prep work, you need to watch this whole thing before you sign anything. Hit subscribe before we begin, because I cover this kind of stuff every single week, and I don't want you to miss it. I'm Jerry Davis, and I've spent years in renovation and construction, watching homeowners make the exact same mistakes on both ends of the process, buying and selling. And the selling side honestly frustrates me more because the mistakes are almost always avoidable. People spend years in a house. They pour money into it, and then right at the finish line, they either give it away by listing it as is, or they throw money at the wrong upgrades and still don't move the needle on price. I've seen both too many times. So, what I want to do today is walk you through what actually matters when you're preparing a house to sell, what the as-is label really signals to buyers, what small fixes have a massive return, and what big renovations you should absolutely skip if you're planning to sell within the next year or two. Let's start with what as-is actually means in the real world, because I think a lot of sellers misunderstand this. When you list a house as is, you're not just saying you don't want to do repairs. You're sending a signal to every buyer who sees that listing. You're telling them something is wrong. Even if your house is perfectly livable and mostly in good shape, that phrase immediately triggers suspicion. Buyers start thinking roof, foundation, mold, plumbing. They assume the worst, because why else would someone refuse to negotiate on condition? So right out of the gate, you've narrowed your buyer pool. You've filtered out anyone who needs a mortgage with a strict appraisal. You've scared off buyers who aren't experienced with renovation. And the people who do show up are investors and flippers who are going to lowball you. That's not a negotiation. That's a liquidation. Now, here's what I want you to understand. Sometimes as is the right move. If the house genuinely needs a full gut renovation, if you've inherited a property in rough shape, if the foundation has serious issues and you just don't have the capital to fix it, then yes, price it accordingly and sell it as is. That's an honest transaction. But most people listing as is don't actually have a house that needs all that. They have a house with a dated kitchen, a bathroom with old grout, a few broken fixtures, a stain on the ceiling from a leak that was fixed 2 years ago, and carpet that's seen better days. That is not an as-is house. That is a house that needs about 3 to 6 weeks of focused prep work and a realistic budget. The difference in your sale price could be $30,000, $40,000, $50,000. I've seen it go higher than that. So let's talk about what actually moves the needle when you're prepping to sell. And let me start with the one thing almost every seller skips because it feels invisible: the inspection. I know, you're thinking, why would I pay for an inspection on a house I'm trying to sell? Here's why. Because your buyer is going to get one, and when their inspector finds something, you lose all the control. You're negotiating from a defensive position. You either fix it on their timeline, drop the price, or the deal falls apart. But if you get a pre-listing inspection, which usually runs $300 to $500, you find out exactly what's coming before the buyer does. You get to choose the contractor. You get to fix it on your schedule. You get to price it into the listing confidently. And when a buyer asks for an inspection report, you can hand them yours and say, here's what we found and here's what we fixed. That kind of transparency builds trust, and it almost always keeps deals together. Here's what no one tells you about deferred maintenance. Small stuff compounds. A buyer's inspector walks through your house and writes a report. If that report has 25 items on it, even if most of them are minor, the buyer starts to feel like the house is neglected, like nobody cared about it. And that feeling is what kills deals or tanks negotiations. But if that report only has 4 or 5 items, most of them cosmetic, the buyer feels confident. They feel like they're buying a house that was respected. Same house, completely different perception, just based on how much visible and documented maintenance you stayed on top of. So before you list, go through every room and fix the small stuff. Recaulk the tub, replace the cracked outlet covers, fix the door that sticks, tighten the cabinet hinges, replace the bathroom exhaust fan that rattles. None of these things cost more than a few $100s total, but they change the story your house tells. Now let's talk about the kitchen, because this is where sellers constantly get the math wrong in both directions. I get calls from people who are about to spend $40,000 on a full kitchen renovation right before they list, and I have to have an uncomfortable conversation with them every single time. Look, a full kitchen renovation almost never returns dollar for dollar at resale. Not even close. If you spend $40,000, you might add $20,000 to $25,000 in value if you're lucky, depending on the market. So you've just lost $15,000 trying to impress a buyer. Here's the problem with that logic. You're designing a kitchen for someone you've never met. You don't know their taste. Maybe they love quartz. Maybe they hate it. Maybe they want to gut it themselves and do something completely custom. You just robbed them of that chance and robbed yourself of the money. But here's what you should do instead. If the kitchen is dated but functional, you refinish the cabinet faces, you replace the hardware, you swap in a clean, modern faucet, you add a new undermount sink if the old one is stained or rusted, and you make sure the countertops are at least clean and not visibly damaged. If they're Formica and they're in good shape, leave them. A buyer can see past Formica. They cannot see past a kitchen that feels dirty, cramped, or broken. That's the distinction. You're not trying to wow anyone with a magazine renovation. You're trying to remove any reason for them to negotiate the price down. There's a big difference between those two goals. Bathrooms follow the same logic, but with a few specific things worth addressing. Grout is one of the highest return fixes in any bathroom, and almost nobody does it before they list. Old grout that's gray, stained, or cracked makes an entire bathroom look neglected, even if the tile itself is perfectly fine. A professional grout cleaning and resealing, or in some cases a full regrout of the shower, can make a bathroom look almost new. I've seen bathrooms that needed maybe $600 in grout work, and a new vanity light fixture turned from a buyer objection into a selling point. The fixtures matter too. Old brass or corroded chrome on the faucets, towel bars, and toilet paper holder give the whole room a tired feeling. You don't need to retile. You don't need a new vanity. Sometimes swapping the hardware and fixtures for a couple $100s in brushed nickel or matte black finishes makes the room look updated enough that buyers stop focusing on what's old. Can we please stop painting over problems? This one drives me nuts. I walk through houses all the time where someone slapped fresh paint over water stains on the ceiling, over mold in the corner of the bathroom, over wall damage that was never properly repaired. Buyers notice. Inspectors definitely notice. And when they see fresh paint directly over a stain or over cracked drywall that wasn't skim-coated first, they assume you're hiding something, even if what was behind it was minor. Fresh paint over evidence of a problem creates suspicion that the problem is still there. Fix the actual issue first, prime it properly, then paint. That's the sequence. Skipping the first 2 steps doesn't save time. It creates liability. Speaking of paint, let's talk color. If your house has rooms painted in very dark, very bold, or very trendy colors, repaint them before you list. I know, you love that deep navy dining room. I get it. But when a buyer walks in and sees a dark room, they immediately think about how much work it's going to take to change it. They start calculating their time and money before they've even seen the rest of the house. Neutral doesn't mean boring. A warm grage, a soft white, a clean, light gray. These aren't exciting, but they are strategic. They make rooms look larger, they make light look brighter, and they let the buyer imagine their stuff in the space instead of being distracted by yours. Every room you have in a bold or dated color is a room that's working against you in the listing photos and in the showing. Now let's talk about curb appeal, because I see this underestimated constantly. You can have the most immaculate interior in the neighborhood, but if the buyer pulls up and the front yard looks tired, the shutters are faded, and the front door is the same builder beige it was 15 years ago, you've already created doubt. The outside of your house sets the expectation for everything inside. And the good news is curb appeal is one of the highest return categories in presale prep. Painting the front door a clean, bold color, replacing the house numbers with modern ones, adding fresh mulch in the beds, trimming the overgrown shrubs, power washing the driveway and the walkway. None of this is expensive. None of it requires a contractor, but it completely changes the first impression. Here's a pro tip that most agents don't mention. Look at your house from across the street with a critical eye, or better yet, have someone else look at it and tell you what stands out. You've been looking at your house for years. You've stopped seeing what a stranger sees when they pull up for a showing. Sometimes it's a leaning mailbox post. Sometimes it's a cracked porch step. Sometimes it's gutters that are pulling away from the fascia. These details are all over 15 minutes of attention, but they read as neglect to a buyer who's deciding in real time whether to trust your asking price. Let me talk about something that sellers often do with the best intentions, but that almost always hurts them. Replacing flooring right before listing. Not refinishing, not cleaning. Actually, ripping out and installing new floors. Here's the problem. If you put in new LVP or new hardwood before you list, buyers are going to walk on it, live with it, and in about 30% of cases, they were planning to rip it out and put in something they chose themselves anyway. You've spent $12 to $20 a square foot for an upgrade they may not even want. Now, if your floors are genuinely damaged, warped, heavily stained, or have sections that are spongy or squeaky, then yes, address them. But if they're just dated or a color that's out of style, a good cleaning and a fresh area rug in the photos can go a long way. Let the buyer choose their own floors and give them a credit at closing if it's genuinely an issue. You'll almost always come out ahead. And this brings me to one of the most important things I want to say today. Know the difference between a price reduction and a repair credit. When something in your house needs work, a lot of sellers just drop the list price. And I understand why. It feels cleaner, but a blanket price reduction gives the buyer full control over how they interpret the value lost. If there's a bathroom that needs updating and you drop the price by $8,000, the buyer might mentally categorize that as $12,000 of problems. But if you keep the price and offer a $3,000 repair credit at closing specifically for that bathroom, you've framed it, you've given the buyer money toward the specific issue, and you've maintained your price integrity everywhere else. Price reductions are blunt instruments, credits are surgical. Use them strategically. One more thing before we wrap up. If you're in a neighborhood where homes are selling fast, do not skip the staging. I'm not talking about a full interior design overhaul. I'm talking about decluttering every surface, removing personal photos and collections, clearing out the garage enough that it actually looks like a garage, and making sure every room has a clear purpose. Buyers struggle to see potential in cluttered or confusing spaces. If the third bedroom is being used as a storage room, it photographs like a storage room and it shows like a storage room. Clear it out, put a bed or a desk in there, and suddenly it's a bedroom again. That one change can add a room to your effective square footage in the buyer's mind. Tell me in the comments which one you were about to skip, because I promise at least one of these applies to almost every house that's about to go on the market. And if you know someone who just said they're thinking about listing their house as is, send them this video. It might change their mind, or at least make sure they're making that choice with full information instead of just skipping the work. A good pre-sale renovation isn't about spending money. It's about spending the right money in the right places so that you're not losing more at the negotiating table than you put in. Fix the small stuff. Skip the big gut jobs. Know what buyers actually notice. And never list as is without understanding exactly what that label is telling the market about your home. Hit like, subscribe, share it with someone who needs to see it. I'll catch you in the next one.